In the shadow of Florida's pristine beaches and swaying palms, predators stalk America's most vulnerable. They don't hunt in the wilderness, but in nursing homes, rehabilitation centers, and the desperate corners of addiction. Their prey? The elderly, the addicted, the helpless, and sometimes even the dead. For instance, when a little boy died in a car crash, the University of Miami harvested his organs without his parents' consent. A 71-year-old stroke patient vanishes from a North Miami rehabilitation center, but there is no evidence he actually left. 2 years earlier, in a quiet Miami Gardens neighborhood, a frail 81-year-old man disappears. His caretaker of 14 years continues her daily routine until she makes a dark, twisted confession to a neighbor. Across the state, young men and women desperate for recovery from addiction receive offers too good to refuse. Free flights to Florida, luxury accommodations, comprehensive treatment covered by insurance, but instead of healing, they find themselves trapped in a billion-dollar scheme where they're nothing more than commodities to be brokered, exploited, and recycled through fraudulent facilities. Even the dead find no peace. In Pensacola, a storage unit auction reveals a grotesque collection, the organs of more than 100 people stored in household containers, some in convenience store cups and Tupperware. In Orange City, a mother-daughter duo sells human skull fragments on Facebook Marketplace for a profit. In Mount Dora, graves were robbed for human remains to perform dark rituals. These aren't isolated incidents. They aren't anomalies. They form a pattern across Florida, a state where vulnerability has become a business opportunity, where those least able to protect themselves become targets for exploitation. But the most terrifying question isn't what happened to these victims, it's how many others remain undiscovered, hidden away in storage rooms, buried in backyards, trapped in fraudulent facilities, or reduced to commodities even after death. And as you watch this in your home, in a neighborhood that appears perfectly normal from the outside, ask yourself, how many predators around me are out looking for their next vulnerable victim? Hello strangers, welcome back to the Strange Bar and Grill. I'm your host, JP. Today I have several stories coming from Florida. Now they're all separate, but they're all related to one common theme: predators preying on the vulnerable. So make sure you watch until the end because you don't want to miss a single one of these cases. And for the record, I am not AI. It began on a humid September morning in 2024 outside the North Dade Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in North Miami. A family clutches photographs of an elderly Haitian man, their grief palpable as they demand answers. Their hand-painted signs read, "Justice for Alain." Alain Etienne was 71 years old, a Haitian immigrant who had built a life in America over more than 3 decades. He had worked as a chef and helped many of his relatives find their American dream in South Florida. After suffering 2 strokes and an aneurysm, he was admitted to this rehabilitation center on August 11th for recovery therapy. The facility had called the family on August 23rd, claiming Alain had signed himself out, a claim that baffled the family. How could a frail stroke and aneurysm patient simply just check himself out? The family immediately filed a missing persons report with North Miami Police, who distributed flyers seeking information on his whereabouts. For more than a week, the Etienne family searched desperately for their loved one. Then on September 2nd, they received an anonymous phone call from a staff member at the facility. Alain's body had been discovered in a storage room at the very place that was supposed to care for him. He was identified by the wristband still attached to his arm. Alain's niece, Rively Bruce, described the horror of their discovery. "That's horrifying because that means he died alone, and he died suffering," she says, her voice breaking. "It just doesn't make sense." When approached, the rehabilitation center staff just closed their doors, offering only a prepared statement claiming cooperation with authorities. Later, they issued a statement extending thoughts and condolences to the family. But condolences don't answer the agonizing questions. How did a stroke patient end up in a storage room Why did the facility claim he had left? How long had he been without food, water, or his essential medication before he died? Was he locked in that closet as a form of punishment? Did he pass on at some point, and then later they just stuffed him into the closet as some form of cover-up? Because one would think if he just wandered in, he could find his way out. It just doesn't make sense to me. What do you think? But just a month before this incident, Florida health regulators rebuked the home for failing to treat residents in a dignified manner and with respect, accusing caregivers of mocking residents who couldn't feed themselves. Was this man possibly starved to death? A year earlier, the State Agency for Healthcare Administration designated residents in the home in immediate jeopardy of serious harm based upon the facility's inability to maintain proper infection control procedures. The facility was also on a watch list because they failed to meet minimum standards of care. Aileen's case, while horrific, was not an isolated incident. It forms part of a broader pattern of exploitation, targeting those least able to protect themselves, a pattern that extends across Florida and reveals the dark underbelly of American vulnerability. 2 years earlier, in May of 2022, police tape had cordoned off a modest property at the 200 block of Northwest 194th Terrace in Miami Gardens, the scene of another disturbing crime against a vulnerable elder. 50-year-old Cleo Maria Trice had been living with an 81-year-old man since 2008. At one point, they dated, but it's reported that their relationship turned into a father-daughter type of relationship, which that sounds weird as hell already. Neighbors described him as very frail and said he walked with a stick lately. What happened inside this home would only come to light when Trice made a shocking confession to her neighbor. One of our neighbors, a couple blocks up the street, allegedly told another neighbor she had committed a crime in terms of killing her roommate, strangling him, and then buried him in the backyard, a witness revealed, still visibly shaken by the memory. The neighbor immediately contacted police, who arrived to find Trice at the home. According to arrest reports, she admitted to killing and burying the elderly man. When officers searched the property, they located a wooden plank on the east side of the residence. Upon removing the wooden plank, officers located what appeared to be a freshly filled grave. Forensic investigators worked throughout the night, under floodlights, carefully excavating what would prove to be the grave of the 81-year-old victim. Trice was charged with second-degree murder and held without bond. Conversations with neighbors and court documents revealed a troubling picture. The victim had recently fallen ill, becoming more dependent on his caretaker. This increased vulnerability coincided with his murder. "I'm still shocked. I can't believe it happened," said Alex Hughes, who lived next door. "She snapped, choking him to death and burying him in the backyard." Detective Ramirez, who worked the case, explained that this reflected a growing concern. What we often see is a pattern of escalation. Isolation comes first, then financial exploitation, and finally, physical abuse. The more dependent the victim becomes, the greater the risk. Most disturbing was how easily the victim had been rendered invisible. Like Aileen Etienne, he had been cast aside, his humanity disregarded. Two elderly men, both immigrants, both dependent on others for care, had been betrayed by those entrusted with their well-being. But the exploitation of vulnerability in Florida extended far beyond the elderly, because not only the living can be exploited, the deceased can be exploited as well. The small courtroom in Lee County filled quickly on that July morning in 1998. Emmanuel Vernay sat quietly beside his wife, Immacula Vincent, their hands intertwined in silent support. 8 years had passed since they lost their son, Frenzy, in a devastating car crash. But the pain in their eyes remained fresh and undiminished. Today, they face the University of Miami in a landmark case that would test Florida's organ donation laws and expose the vulnerabilities of immigrant families navigating America's complex medical system. "My son can never rest in peace because he doesn't have eyes or a heart," Emmanuel explained in the days before the trial, his voice breaking with emotion. "In Haiti, we bury the whole body, just as we come into the world." The Vernay's nightmare began on July 10, 1990. on a stretch of highway north of Immokalee. A 3-car collision left their young son Frenzy with a crushing head wound. At the hospital, as the family grappled with their grief and Immaculate nursed her own injuries from the crash, they found themselves facing questions about organ donation, questions they claim they never truly understood or agreed to. Immaculate, whose primary language remained Haitian Creole, recalled the confusion of those devastating hours. I don't know, ask Papa, she testified at an earlier trial in the case, referring to how she had deferred the organ donation questions to Frenzy's father. Yet somehow, the University of Miami's organ procurement operation, the 5th busiest in the country, obtained Frenzy's organs. The lawsuit alleged something more disturbing than miscommunication. It claimed that the university's organ procurement manager in the Collier County had forged Immaculate's name on the consent form. The case spotlighted Florida's aggressive organ procurement practices. On a per capita basis, Florida harvested more body parts than any other state in the nation. This efficiency came with questions about methods and ethics, particularly regarding informed consent from vulnerable populations. Stuart Youngner, an ethicist at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, who followed the case, raised profound questions about the circumstances surrounding the consent. Is it reasonable to ask somebody who's just lost a child, who herself has been injured, and who doesn't speak English well, to give a real informed consent? The issue is not only whether consent was obtained, Youngner emphasized, but whether it was obtained in a good way. The circumstances raised a question about whether the mother should have been approached at all. For the Vernays, the loss extended beyond their son. Their cultural and spiritual beliefs central to their Haitian identity had been violated. In their understanding, Frenzy could never truly rest without his complete body. This cultural dimension added another layer to the case, the vulnerability of immigrants whose beliefs might not be fully understood or respected by American medical institutions. And I'm assuming this is the University of Miami. There's a large Haitian population in that area, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure they're used to their customs and beliefs. I think this is more of a case that they just wanted someone's organs and they're just gonna take them. It's easier to get forgiveness than to get permission, right? Isn't that what they say? But let me know what you think in the comment section. The serenity of Edgewood Cemetery in Mount Dora, Florida, was shattered in December 2020 when groundskeepers discovered a horrifying scene. 4 graves had been desecrated, their concrete vaults pried open with crowbars, and the skulls of the deceased removed. Among the violated graves were those of 3 military veterans who had served their country honorably. Men who had survived war, only to have their eternal rest disturbed decades later. What began as a disturbing act of vandalism soon revealed itself as something far more disgusting. Crime scene investigators collected evidence from the scene, including discarded cigarette butts. DNA analysis eventually led authorities to 43-year-old Brian Montalvo Tolentino of Davenport in Polk County. When confronted by detectives, Tolentino confessed and implicated his accomplice, 39-year-old Juan Burgos Lopez of Lake Wells. This dude just started snitching immediately. We called out our forensic people, our crime scene people. We processed that scene like we would process a homicide, said Lake County Sheriff's Detective. They never thought that we would go to those lengths to identify the persons responsible. What investigators discovered at Burgos Lopez's home was a scene from a nightmare. Inside a shed on his property, they found a religious shrine containing 6 human skulls, along with other human remains, including a hand and partial arm. The men admitted that 4 of the skulls came from the Mount Dora Cemetery. The motivation behind the grave robberies added another disturbing layer to the crime. The men told investigators they practiced Palo Mayombe, a religion that originated in Cuba and requires human remains for certain rituals. They specifically targeted veterans' graves because their religion demanded remains from individuals who had done something heroic. He referred to cemeteries as holy sites and shopping centers. For the families of those whose graves were violated, the desecration compounded grief that had long ago been processed. The men performed elaborate rituals before entering the cemetery, including drinking rum and exhaling cigar smoke to protect them from the spirits. They left orange peels in the graves to prevent the spirits from following the stolen remains. The calculated nature of these acts revealed not just superstition, but a cold disregard for both the dead and the living who mourned them. Both men were charged with 4 counts of disturbing the contents of a grave and 4 counts of abuse of a dead human body. Burgos Lopez faced additional charges of buying, selling, and trafficking dead bodies. On a sweltering August day in 2012, a man who had purchased the contents of Unit B12 at Uncle Bob's storage in Pensacola made a ghastly discovery. As he sorted through furniture and boxes, he detected a strange odor. Opening a series of containers, he found what would later be identified as human organs and tissue samples, the remains of more than 100 people. The storage unit had belonged to Dr. Michael Birkeland, a former associate medical examiner who had worked for the medical examiner's office between 1997 and 2003, when he was fired for failing to complete autopsy reports in a timely manner. The manager of the storage facility recalled the disturbing find. He told us he'd been storing household goods and office furniture. We never had any indication there was anything unusual in the unit. According to police reports, Birkeland had stored human brains, hearts, lungs, and other organs in formaldehyde inside plastic containers, specimen cups, trash bags, and even a 32-ounce styrofoam cup from a convenience store. Many containers had cracked and leaked. Jeff Martin, director of the District 1 Medical Examiner's Office in Pensacola, explained that the remains were believed to be from autopsies Birkeland performed between 1997 and 2007 at funeral homes across Florida. Some of the containers had labels with names and autopsy dates, but others did not. The formaldehyde was leaking from a 32-ounce drink cup that was holding a human heart. Birkeland was ultimately arrested and charged with improper storage of hazardous waste and keeping a public nuisance. But the case left lasting trauma for approximately 10 families who were notified that their loved ones' remains had been discovered in that unit. Disturbingly, the commercialization of human remains continues today. In April of 2025, police in Orange City, Florida arrested 52-year-old Kimberly Shopper for selling human remains through her curio shop, Wicked Wonderland, and on Facebook Marketplace. The investigation began in December of 2023 when police received a tip that the business was selling human bones. They found the store's Facebook page advertising various bones, including skull fragments for $90, a human rib for $35, and a partial human skull for $600. When questioned, Shopper's business partner Ashley Lalisi admitted they had been selling human bones for several years and was unaware that it was prohibited in the state of Florida. She described the items as genuine human remains and delicate in nature. 5 bone samples were seized and examined by the Volusia County Medical Examiner's Office, which determined they likely represent 2 different individuals, one of possible archaeological origin and the other of anatomical origin. Later, Shopper claimed the bones were educational models, which would be legal to sell under Florida law. However, the investigation concluded that Shopper knowingly purchased and listed human bones for sale. What's most striking about these cases is how human dignity had been commodified, reduced to financial value even after death. The deceased, unable to advocate for themselves, became vulnerable to exploitation. So, let's switch gears for a second here. Now, we talked about the elderly, we talked about the deceased, but what about when people just need help, right? How are those individuals taken advantage of? In a Palm Beach County courtroom in May of 2017, parents stepped forward clutching photographs of children lost to overdoses while supposedly under the care of treatment facilities run by Kenneth Chapman. One mother described how her daughter had called days before her death, excited about the beautiful facility by the beach, where she believed she would finally overcome her addiction. "We were so hopeful," the mother testified, her voice breaking. We thought we found the place that would save her. Instead, we were sending her to her death. Behind the facade of Chapman's sober homes, bearing hopeful names like Staying Alive and Total Recovery Sober Living, lay an elaborate scheme that transformed addiction recovery into a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. U.S. District Judge Donald M. Middlebrooks sentenced Chapman to 27.5 years in prison after he pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, money laundering, and trafficking. The 46-year-old Boynton Beach resident had engineered a perfect storm of exploitation. As a convicted felon, prohibiting him from owning treatment centers, he had his wife Laura file fraudulent licensing applications claiming she was the sole owner. She would appear for inspections while Kenneth managed operations behind the scenes. The business model was ruthlessly efficient. Recruit patients with premium insurance, bill heavily for unnecessary tests, and keep the patients cycling through the system. Chapman paid kickbacks to other sober homeowners for referrals, disguising the payments as consulting fees or case management fees. Most disturbing was how Chapman viewed his vulnerable charges not as people to be healed, but as commodities to be exploited. He permitted and sometimes encouraged patients to continue using drugs as long as they attended enough treatment to justify billing their insurance. When the patient's benefits were about to expire, he would sometimes provide drugs to ensure a positive test, then report a relapse to extend coverage. For female patients, the nightmare only deepened. Court records revealed that Chapman coerced women into selling their bodies, telling them they wouldn't have to participate in treatment as long as their insurance could be billed. He provided housing, drugs, and even advertised their services, collecting the proceeds as rent. Instead of providing a safe and sober living environment, Chapman gave his patients illegal drugs, fraudulent insurance bills, and demanded they engage in selling their bodies under duress. While patients suffered, the Chapmans lived lavishly on the proceeds of their fraud. Laura Chapman received 36 months in prison for her role in the scheme. In June of 2024, Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody announced the dismantling of what she called a massive trafficking ring, operating out of businesses in Hillsborough and Manatee counties. The case highlighted the need for the newly formed Florida Human Trafficking Strike Team. At the center of this operation was Lena Payne, owner of several businesses that presented themselves as legitimate spas and barbershops, but functioned as fronts for human trafficking. Authorities charged Payne with 6 felonies: human trafficking, money laundering, at least $100,000, deriving the support from the proceeds of forced sex work, using a two-way communications device to commit a felony, racketeering, and racketeering conspiracy. The disturbing details emerged in July 2023 when a woman called law enforcement to report she was being forced into human trafficking at a business called Latin Relaxation. According to prosecutors, the woman was compelled to pay Payne back for an exorbitant debt, and this was against her will. This debt included $40,000 to $50,000 for help entering the country and an additional $13,000 for a relative's medical treatment. This debt bondage scheme primarily targeted women from Colombia and Venezuela. After charging tens of thousands of dollars to smuggle women across the border, Payne held them captive through debt and coerced them to perform sex acts for money. Authorities report that she often made threats of physical violence against the women and their families in other countries. The scale of the operation was staggering. Over 117 victims had cycled through Payne's business in the last decade. Alright guys, that's going to be it for today. Let me know what you guys think of these cases in the comment section. Now this video is about cases in Florida, but I'm sure you see this all over through major cities throughout the United States, hell, across the world even, right? This isn't just a Florida problem. This is everybody problem. This is a world problem. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Alright guys, be good, be safe.